I hope you enjoy this hero's journey into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and physics. If you want to help me create more content like this, please subscribe and consider sponsoring me here on YouTube. I also want to thank the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being for sponsoring this course, and you can check that school out at divineinfinitebeing.com. Copernican Revolution, Death of Platonic Christian Cosmology. Kepler, Galileo, and Newton each vindicated Copernicus's mid-16th century theory that the Earth and the other planets revolve around the central sun. Although each of those astronomers believed he was fulfilling the Platonic Christian quest to use mathematics to discover the eternal ideas of God's creative mind, with the rise of heliocentric astronomy, the Platonic Christian cosmology about the intercessory mother sphere at the edge of the geocentric universe, diffusing God's grace to the central Earth, collapsed and shattered like a stained glass dome. So the mathematical success of the academic tradition stemming back to Plato, ironically, overthrew the Platonic cosmology, which had been embraced by the Western mind since Plato, through Jesus, throughout the Middle Ages, into Dante, but then finally with Copernicus's discovery of the heliocentric theory, all of that faith in the mother substance of the cosmic horizon started collapsing. René Descartes, doubting the self to prove the self. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, a Catholic contemporary of Kepler, Galileo, and Pascal, is one of the great triumvirate of mathematical forefathers mentioned by Danzig above. He is credited, among other things, with establishing the Cartesian grid in geometry and initiating the scientific revolution. As a philosopher, Descartes set about re-establishing a belief in the soul and God on the power of skeptical human reason alone. In his meditations, he decided to perform a systematic thought experiment in which he would accept as valid any remotely plausible reason to doubt anything he thought he knew, to see if any indubitable truth would be left standing. So, scientific skepticism had overthrown the hegemony of the Catholic cosmology, which is based on a fusion of biblical cosmology and Plato's cosmology. Once that was thrown into serious doubt by the Copernican Revolution, theologians were left wondering, upon what do we base our belief in the world? If the Bible has been shown to be scientifically inaccurate and not the infallible Word of God, well then what can we trust? So René Descartes, a French Catholic, decided to see if he could discover some independently, rationally discoverable principle upon which to build a worldview, and he believes he did find that, as we'll discuss. Descartes' famous slogan, "I think, therefore I am." Noting that there is no way to prove the difference between being awake and dreaming, Descartes further assumed that some evil and omnipotent demon was forcing him to accept hallucinations, including his own body, the world, and even mathematics, as reality. Even in that worst-case scenario, Descartes believed he could know one thing for certain, that he is thinking, and must therefore exist as a thinking thing. Even if every truth claim he could think of is doubtful, the fact that he is doubting, which is a form of thinking, remains. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. That cogito ergo sum is equivalent to the E equals mc squared of philosophy. Everybody's heard Einstein's equation E equals mc squared. And from the field of philosophy, everybody's heard cogito ergo sum. Just as from the field of poetry, everybody's heard Shakespeare's to be or not to be. It's one of the most famous slogans of all fields of study. So Descartes, no longer able to rely on the Bible as a collectively reliable source of knowledge about the cosmos, sits down in his armchair, as he describes in his essay Meditations, and starts doubting every single thing he could possibly doubt about what he normally accepts as everyday reality. And one sweeping discovery he comes upon is that you can't tell the difference between being awake and dreaming. When you're dreaming, you think you're awake. You're convinced that it's a real world. Similarly, in our waking world, we're convinced it's a real world, but it could be just another level of dream. And even deeper than that, there's the possibility that some omnipotent spiritual being could be tricking us into accepting what we believe to be reality, when in fact it's a hallucination. The picture here is a brain in a vat. The brain thinks it's a woman rowing a boat, and it's hallucinating it. It can have all of the same sense impressions implanted in it that a woman might have while rowing a boat on a lake. There's no way to prove that we're not living in a hallucination. Well then, is there anything at all that we can believe in unquestioningly? Is there any single first principle upon which we can start to build a worldview? And he says yes. The very fact of doubting everything is itself a real thing. We doubt, doubting is thinking. We are a thinking thing. Maybe everything else we think about is an illusion, but one truth remains: I think, therefore I am. Cartesian dualism and its cure. Descartes' God equals singularity. According to Descartes, there are two separate worlds: the unthinking world of material substance, extended in space, res extensa, and the spatially unextended world of thinking substance, res cogitans, found in humans and God alone. This sharply dualistic worldview is the infamous Cartesian split. So here in Meditations is Descartes' definition of God. By the name of God, I understand an infinite substance, eternal, immutable, independent, omniscient, omnipotent, and by which I and all the other things which exist, if it be true that any such exist, have been created and produced. I say, according to Descartes' reasoning, the gravitational singularity, which is not extended in space, must therefore be a thinking substance, and is furthermore equivalent to God. So the Cartesian split, there's two separate worlds: the world of matter, which is extended in space but it doesn't think, and the world of rational souls, which has no extension in space but it does think. If something exists and it is not extended in space, then according to Descartes' definition, it must be a thinking thing. That's why I say, according to his reasoning, the singularity, which is not extended in space, it's a point of zero volume, must therefore be a thinking substance. Moreover, if we look at Descartes' definition of God, and we compare that to the gravitational singularity, then you see how closely they parallel each other. An infinite substance, that applies to the gravitational singularity, which is an infinitely deep well of gravity that contains the entire universe, the past, the present, and the future of this universe and all others. Eternal. The singularity is outside of space-time. It's eternal, immutable. You can't destroy a gravitational singularity. Independent. Well, it's independent of the material world. It creates the material world. It destroys the material world inside black holes and at each point of the cosmic horizon from one perspective, according to cosmic complementarity. Things that leave the universe past the horizon of the cosmos, if you were following a bit of information past the cosmic horizon, then you'd be gone. You'd be erased from the universe. But from the perspective of someone remaining within the universe, the information of which you're made would be smeared out all around that inner sphere of the cosmic horizon and radiate back in. So continuing this comparison of Descartes' definition of God and the gravitational singularity: omniscient, the singularity contains every bit of information from the past, the present, and the future. Omnipotent, it's a point of infinite energy. It has infinite power. It is omnipotent. And by which I and all the other things which exist have been created. Everything was created at the Big Bang from the gravitational singularity. So if we grant to the singularity self-reflection, then it does clearly equal Descartes' definition of God. Descartes' mechanistic cosmology. Descartes combined the opposing principles of Democritus and Plato. So according to the Greek philosopher Democritus, the material world is an infinity of soulless atoms interacting in an infinite void over an infinite amount of time. Whereas according to Plato, the material world is organized by eternal mathematical forms in the mind of God. So Descartes combined those two opposing philosophical principles and came up with the modern scientific worldview. Descartes describes the universe created by God as a marvelously designed machine made of interacting atoms of soulless matter, like a great clock, the inner workings of which are ordered by impersonal mechanical forces that lend themselves to mathematically precise descriptions, the truths of which are certified by the fact that the perfectly honest God created the correlations between nature and the rational laws of mathematics. So Descartes reasons that there is a God and that God must be perfectly honest. And God's perfect honesty is the reason that we can trust the correlations between mathematical descriptions of nature and the way nature actually acts. Why should it be that these abstract ideas can so perfectly predict the movement of these unthinking bits of matter extended in space. Why is there this relationship? There's no apparent causal link between the one and the other. It seems to be this incredibly happy coincidence, and Descartes says yes, that coincidence was brought about by the perfectly honest God. He made those correlations occur, and we can trust that they're not deluding us, because God wouldn't do that. So this idea of the clockwork universe, Isaac Newton completed this worldview and came up with the mathematical formulas that predict the interaction of these combinations of soulless atoms extended in space. That's Newtonian mechanistic cosmology. And it works miraculously well in the relatively narrow spectrum of things that humans can perceive through our three-dimensional bodies. But when you go smaller than a certain level, then Newton's physics no longer work. When you get larger than a certain level or faster than a certain level, then again, Newton's formulas no longer predict anything. They become useless, but they are very useful within our day-to-day world. Descartes' legacy, science with no God. Plato's theory of the predictive power of the mathematical forms underlying nature was practically deified by scientists after Newton, but Plato's related geocentric theory of an eternal spiritual order shining out from the central point and in from the cosmic horizon on threads of destiny was discarded. So here's a quote from Richard Tarnas in The Passion of the Western Mind. Paradoxically, the Platonic philosophy had served as the sine qua non for a worldview that seemed directly to controvert the Platonic assumptions. So Plato's philosophy was an absolutely necessary prerequisite for the scientific worldview to emerge. He's the one who said, if you discover the mathematical forms that describe the movements of the planets and the movements of musical instruments, that will help you open the eye of the soul to the idea of the good. And you will learn these absolute ideas by studying their shadow in the eternal realm of mathematical forms. Mathematical forms are like a shadow of the higher level of absolute eternal spiritual forms. If you want to learn the mind of God, which Augustine equated with Plato's idea of the good, then you study the mathematical forms underlying the visible three-dimensional objects in our material world. That was Plato's divided line and the cave allegory, which we discussed previously. So that cosmology of the idea of the good existing along with all of the other absolute ideas out at the horizon of the cosmos, the mother substance, as described in the Timaeus, became untenable in light of the Copernican Revolution and the mechanistic cosmology, which was envisioned by Descartes and put into effect by Isaac Newton, as well as Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo, and then finally Isaac Newton. And that mechanistic cosmology with its powerfully predictive scientific formulas for the force of gravity controlled the Western mind for the next 200 years and helped it rise to preeminence in the world. But then everything started falling apart with the discovery of electromagnetic radiation and its absolute speed, and then finally resulting in Einstein's special theory of relativity in 1905. Industrial Revolution and environmental crisis, the cause and the cure. Descartes said that irrational objects in the material world, including animals and plants, have no soul, but they do have an enduring extension in space that can be precisely measured in a way that allows reason to discern mathematically expressible connections between them. Knowledge of these mathematically certain relationships allows humans to invent godlike technologies to manipulate the material world for our own needs. The Cartesian split separating mind and matter, as well as rational humans and the rest of nature, is healed if psyche equals singularity, for the omnicentric singularity contains all. As we saw, Descartes defines God, the creator of the universe, as a spatially unextended, thinking substance, who is furthermore an infinite substance, eternal, immutable, independent, omniscient, omnipotent. So Descartes said animals and plants, although they seem to be alive, in fact have no soul. They're just machines, automatons, like the robots that you would see in old clocks in Descartes' time, which were wound up on gears and then they would come out of a little house and they'd strike a bell with a hammer. Animals are just like that, only because God is the architect, they seem even more lifelike. But they have no soul, they have no reason, and therefore they have no real feelings. Although they might howl in pain, it's just a mechanical reaction. There's no sentient being experiencing anything, according to Descartes. So that philosophy leads people to look upon all the other species that have no reason as just material resources to be used for our own benefit. And that disdain or disrespect for the feelings of other living creatures, when combined with the godlike technologies produced by the mathematical forms initiated by Descartes' mathematical revolution and completed by Isaac Newton, when you put those two things together, it's a deadly combination for all of the other species on the earth. Al Gore's holographic God, his antidote to Plato, is the acme of Platonism. So here is Al Gore's book, 1992 bestseller, Earth and the Balance, Ecology and the Human Spirit. And a spoiler alert here, he blames Plato and René Descartes for the environmental crisis because of this two worlds theory that we've been discussing. But I say his antidote to Plato is the acme of Platonism, as you will see. In Earth, in the Balance, Ecology and the Human Spirit, Al Gore blames Descartes' despiritualization of nature and ultimately Plato's two worlds theory for the environmental crisis today, in which we, in Gore's words, dare to exercise godlike powers unaccompanied by godlike wisdom. Ironically, Gore's antidote to Platonism is the acme of the cave allegory. So here's Al Gore's antidote to the environmental crisis. By gathering in the mind's eye all of creation, one can perceive the image of the Creator vividly. Indeed, my understanding of how God is manifest in the world can be best conveyed through the metaphor of the hologram. Each tiny portion of the hologram contains a tiny representation of the entire three-dimensional image, but only faintly. By experiencing nature in its fullest, we can glimpse, bright, shining as the sun, an infinite image of God. So to see with the mind's eye an infinite image of God, bright, shining as the sun, is just a restatement of Plato's cave allegory. And as we saw, Brian Greene himself repeatedly compared Plato's cave allegory with holographic string theory. So that's the irony. Plato's two worlds theory, yes, he says there is an eternal spiritual world and this material world is a temporary shadow projection of that more perfect world of absolute perfect eternal spiritual forms. However, what Al Gore didn't mention is that Plato says all of the living beings down here in the material world are reincarnating souls, each of which is imprinted with all of the absolute ideas that are contained in the idea of the good, and that the ultimate goal of philosophy is to open the eye of the soul to this infinitely bright spiritual sun, which contains everything that ever was or will be and projects it into being. So the solution to the environmental crisis is Plato's idea of the good, especially when we see it restated in the psyche equals singularity equation. Gore has a much better argument against Descartes, who clearly did say the animals and the plants have no soul, they're just machines. That kind of lack of knowledge of the essence of consciousness, in my opinion, is responsible, at least in part, for the environmental crisis. But for this class, where we're trying to perform heroics on a cosmic scale for an all-loving, all-powerful God, you can see what the stakes are. Earth in the Balance. By embracing the psyche equals singularity equation, we open up the eye of our soul to the idea of the good, or at least start down that hero's journey towards ultimate individuation and self-realization. And it's that realization alone, which Gore is saying here, will save the Earth. So if there ever was a hero's journey, saving the Earth would certainly count as one. And again, how do we save the Earth? By bringing to consciousness this equation, psyche equals singularity. David Hume, Radical Empiricism. Okay, so when Isaac Newton came up with these mathematical formulas that describe the interaction of material soulless atoms, everybody thought, so that's it. Humans have finally deciphered the ideas and the mind of God. We know with predictive certainty how the natural physical world will behave. David Hume said, no, you did not discover these absolute ideas that Plato talked about and that Descartes believed in, because knowledge that's dependable must come through one of our 5 sense organs. That's empiricism. Empirical observation is observing something through one or more of our 5 bodily sense organs. If we can't see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, or hear it, then it's just a figment of the imagination. So let me read here. Radical empiricism. David Hume rejected Descartes' rationalism, according to which the self is an immaterial thinking substance stamped by God with innate forms of knowledge that reason can behold. Hume argues that individual sense impressions, i.e. empirical observations, which he calls matters of fact, are the only true source of knowledge, and that subsequently we imagine relationships, which he calls relations of ideas, between these fundamentally unconnected sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches. Hume says that Newton's laws are not based on eternal forms of reason that must always hold true. Rather, they are based on the false assumption that the sequence in which matters of fact unfolded in the past must necessarily continue in the future. Space, time, causality, and mathematics are not eternal ideas of God's universal mind, nor are they matters of fact, because we do not perceive them with any of our 5 physical sense organs. They are useful habits of perception. So David Hume's the wrecking ball of philosophers who dismantled the Platonic tradition that had survived in a truncated form through Descartes into Newton, because although the idea of this outermost sphere containing the idea of the good and all of the other absolute ideas fell away, the fundamental Platonic belief that the mathematical forms reveal the ideas in the creative mind of God. The mathematical forms that describe the way nature unfolds are the eternal ideas in God's mind. Hume says no. Truth is rooted in physical sense perceptions that can be measured. Everything else is just ideas and relations of ideas. These unconnected sense impressions. You see something, you taste something. All you're really ever experiencing is a bombardment of discrete, unconnected sense impressions, tastes and smells and touches and sounds. They're not really connected. Your mind then categorizes these unconnected, individual point-like sense perceptions into these relationships, into spatial relationships, into temporal relationships, into causal relationships. This event happens before that event repeatedly. Therefore, this event causes that event. Hume says no. While it's true that this event A has always been seen to precede immediately event B, that doesn't show that there's any causal connection between them. If I look at event A and then event B, I don't see any physically measurable causal link between them. I just see event A and then event B. You insert the assumption that the sequence is revealing an immutable eternal law of nature. Maybe in the distant past it didn't work that way. Maybe in the distant future it will stop working in that sequence. You don't really know what is causing things to happen. You just observe patterns and then you assume that they're eternal, but they're not. In fact, space, time, the idea of cause and effect, and the entire world of the laws of mathematics are just human inventions. You didn't discover any eternal truths in the mind of God. You just came up with very useful fictions that have survivability value to them. I'm not saying, says Hume, that these are not worthy objects of pursuit. They're very worthy. Look at all the wonderful things that we can derive through mathematics and science. But as a philosopher, let's be careful of what we say about them. They are useful human fictions. They are not eternal truths in the mind of God. And just like space-time, causality, and mathematics cannot be empirically observed with any one of your 5 bodily sense organs, neither can what you call a self. Hume. The self must be constant and invariable. So a treatise of human nature, here's what David Hume has to say. If any impression gives rise to the idea of the self, that impression must continue invariably the same through the whole course of our lives, since self is supposed to exist after that manner. But there is no impression constant and invariable. So Hume says all we ever really experience are unconnected sense impressions. Unconnected memories, thoughts come in discrete little packets, and none of them are connected to any of the others. We then insert these relations of ideas. All of the experiences we have are unique ideas in the mind. Smelling a rose is an idea in the mind. Tasting salt is an idea in the mind. Seeing the sun produces an impression in the mind, a physical sense impression upon your mind. So continuing here, Hume argues that the inconceivable rapidity of the flux of individual sense impressions deceives us into the false opinion that they are one uninterrupted stream of consciousness forming what we call a self. If you look to the left, the picture there is a flip book where you can, if you draw an image and have changes occurring to the image in ever so slight angles, such as this windmill, and you flip the pages, it provides the illusion of one continuous windmill that's moving. Similarly, we have the stream of incoming sense impressions and our memories and thoughts about them. One follows the other with such inconceivable rapidity that it gives the illusion of one uninterrupted continuous stream of consciousness. And that is what we mistake for an enduring self. A real self, according to Descartes' definition, has to be this non-composite, simple, unextended point, because if it was composed of things, then it could be decomposed. But a self is supposed to be this eternally enduring consciousness, so it can't be made of parts, therefore it must just be a single point, and that single point must furthermore have all of its sense impressions occurring to it constantly. All of its memories must remain before its mind's eye at the same time. You can't have a changing worldview and still have an unchanging self. He said if there is such a self, then we should experience some sense impression of it that's continuous and unchanging. If truth can be rooted in empirical observation, sense impressions, and if there is a self, then where is that sense impression that corresponds to a self? It must be some continuous and unchanging sense impression. But we don't have such a thing. All of our sense impressions are constantly changing. However, they do so at such a rapid rate that we have this illusion of a continuous stream. Nevertheless, even that continuous stream is clearly changing. So there is no self, according to Hume. I point to near-death experiences where people say that I experienced the past, the present, and the future simultaneously, specifically out at the horizon of the cosmos. We saw Dante describe the outermost sphere of the cosmos in the same way, that all the leaves scattered in time throughout the universe were experienced in this one point of eternal light. We saw Augustine say the same thing in the Confessions, where he called the outermost horizon our mother, the spouse of God, where you experience things not now one thing, now another, but all things simultaneously. That ancient definition of a self is what Hume is referring to. He says there is no sense impression that's continuous and uninterrupted and unchanging. Therefore, there is no self. I would point him to these near-death experiences where they describe exactly what he's demanding a self must be. Continuing in the slide, he goes on to explain that as memory alone acquaints us with the continuance and extent of this succession of perceptions, it is to be considered upon that account chiefly as the source of personal identity. So the fiction of an individual personal self, Hume attributes to our memory. Because in our memory we can rapidly shift from one sense impression that we had at one point to another, to all the memories of our childhood, and as we grow up to an adult, all of the different points in our biography are at least potentially available to our memory. And that is what gives the illusion of this continuous self. But if there truly was a self, then all of those memories would have to be simultaneously present to us. Otherwise, the self, as defined by Plato and Descartes and Augustine and Dante, wouldn't exist. And again, I point to near-death experiences where people say, as soon as they leave their body and start hurtling through a dark tunnel toward an infinitely bright point of light, they live their whole lives, their whole life flashes before their eyes, and then when they get out to that ultimate point of all loving light, then they can experience the past, the present, and the future of the entire universe. So continuing in the slide, the indivisible simplicity and invariable constancy of the self that Hume demands is supplied by the equation of the psyche with the singularity and the holographic horizon of the cosmos, which serves as the eternal memory bank of the universe, whereupon all sense impressions from the past, present, and future are interwoven at each point, as Jung's NDE and others indicate. So here is the solution to the Cartesian split. There is a self. We are one with all of the universe, what to speak of just this one Earth planet and all the living beings in it. Every living sentient creature on this planet Earth is emanating from a gravitational singularity, a unique soul. We are all inconceivably, simultaneously one with every other living thing, not just other rational human beings, but also the irrational animals and the plants. Every single thing is emanating from this omnicentric gravitational singularity, which is God, of whom we are all absolute parts and parcels. So from David Hume, we move to Immanuel Kant, who I've been talking about since the beginning of this class, because his idea of space, time, and causality as these lenses of cognition imprinted on our minds helps us understand near-death experiences and how people feel themselves expanding outward through space. If our minds are space-time, then it makes sense when our minds are liberated from a physical body, they experience what space-time experiences, which is an accelerating expansion until reaching the speed of light at the horizon of the cosmos. And along the way, as you accelerate faster and faster toward the speed of light, you would perceive the entire universe condensed in a single point of light, the end of a dark tunnel. Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, credited Hume with waking him from his dogmatic slumber. He recognized the logical consistency of Hume's empiricist philosophy, yet he recognized that Newton's laws do seem to reveal unchanging forms of reason that structure the material world. In his Critique of Pure Reason, Kant argues that the empirically unobservable concepts like space-time and causality and mathematics, on which Newton based his laws of physics, are not fictions humans create to help us explain the empirical world, as Hume argued. They are the innate, a priori categories of thought through which the unknowable thing in itself is unconsciously presented to our conscious mind. So Immanuel Kant said, Hume awoke me from my dogmatic slumber. I never questioned the fundamentals of my worldview. You're right. I can't see, smell, touch, taste, or hear space, time, causality, or the numbers of mathematics. And yet, it seems to me that these aren't just fictions of the human mind. How would a human mind ever begin to conceive of these kinds of fictions? Rather, it seems more likely that space-time causality and other similar concepts are inborn, innate lenses of cognition. They are the structures of the mind itself. And that we can't know what the world is in itself because all of our experiences, all of our sense impressions of the world are automatically filtered through these mental lenses, these inborn categories of thought. Every discrete, unconnected sight, smell, touch, taste, and sound that we experience is filtered through a lens of space. It's put into a spatial context. They're related to each other spatially. They're related to each other temporally. They're related to each other according to laws of cause and effect. And they can be described mathematically. But that's not to say that we know what the world in itself is. All we can be certain of is how the unknowable thing in itself is presented to a human mind. Because we can know what these lenses of cognition imprinted on our minds are. So he made a synthesis of Plato's theory of absolute ideas and then Hume's critique of that theory, and he came up with his theory of the a priori categories of thought, space, time, and causality equal the mind. Kant and the a priori categories, space, time, and causality. Kant synthesized Descartes' rationalism, which is also Plato's rationalism, and Hume's empiricism by arguing that we can be absolutely certain that Newton's laws will continue to work everywhere in the universe throughout all time, not because they describe the eternal ideas of God's creative mind, but because wherever humans go, we will automatically interpret our sense impressions of the inherently unknowable thing in itself through the same unchanging, unconscious, a priori categories of thought on which Newtonian science is based: space, time, and causality. So, according to Kant, space, time, and causality are these absolute ideas that Plato talked about, although Kant doesn't say that we know there's such a thing as an absolute idea of the good, but they're equivalent to these absolute ideas imprinted on the human mind because they are the lenses of cognition with which we are born. They are mental structures. They are not physical structures. They are real things existing independently. They're not fictions that humans come up with, but neither are they empirically observable things. We cannot know what the thing in itself is, says Kant, but we can know how it is presented to our minds because our minds are space, time, and causality. We saw that Newton's ideas of space-time and causality were radically transformed in the 20th century, and that even these a priori categories of thought are not necessarily eternal truths, and that is something that Hegel will point out, as we'll now see. I hope you are enjoying this hero's journey into the realm of philosophy, psychology, and physics. If you want to help me create more content like this, please subscribe and consider sponsoring me here on YouTube. You can also click the link to my website, psycheandsingularity.com, to sign up for a multiple-choice test with over 100 well-crafted questions related to this class, and links to the specific parts of each video where the answers can be found. If you take that test to the end, you will receive a certificate indicating that you have become a Psyche and Singularity scholar. In addition to access to that test, there is also the opportunity to answer essay questions that ask you to relate concepts covered in this class to your own hero's journey. I will personally respond to each of those essays, point out any other parts of this class that I think might bolster your plan, Finally, I want to point out that this course is sponsored by the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being, and you can check those guys out at divineinfinitebeing.com.